Okay, it's recording now. All right. So, first of all, I'm Debbie Reynolds. I'm the founder, Chief Data Privacy Officer, CEO of Debbie Reynolds Consulting. I work at the intersection of technology, like emerging technologies, data privacy. People also ask me to talk about cyber risk, talk about that quite a bit. I'm a technologist by trade. They call me the Data Diva, not necessarily the Privacy Diva, because I've been doing technology. Probably you guys are probably too young to remember when they had card catalogs and libraries. Like I was turning those into databases back in the day. So today we're going to be talking about, well, first of all, thank you for inviting me here today. I'm really happy to be here to talk to the ethics, technology, and public policy asynchronous course. And so the thing I'm going to be presenting today is the privacy dilemma, risk posed by facial recognition technology. This session, I'm going to go through my presentation, and then after the presentation, we'll have a Q&A session. Okay. Oops. So this is me. I think I just introduced myself perfectly fine. We don't have to go through the slide. I want to make sure anyone who wants the slides, they can have them after we do our session. So today, in terms of our objectives, we're going to talk about understanding facial recognition technology, thinking about the uses, the risk and concerns, talk about what the standards are right now in the industry in terms of facial recognition. There's a significant case called New Jersey versus ARGA that I'll talk about. I'll talk about some of the applicable laws, and then talk about some of the other risks of facial recognition we need to think about. So before I start, I like to do some stats. So by 2024, it is estimated that the facial recognition market will generate $7 billion in revenue. 59% of adults agree that police should be allowed to use facial recognition in tracking suspects, and they believe that facial recognition, 100% facial recognition accuracy stats rates. That's what people think, but that's not true. 35% of facial recognitions happen when identifying dark-skinned women compared to 1% of white men. So this is one reason why I'm very concerned about facial recognition. So I decided to get involved in discussions around technology and facial recognition, especially around accuracy and those high stakes uses of facial recognition. So I'll go to the next slide. So what is facial recognition? So facial recognition is a category of biometrics, and the technology is used to scan, store, recognize people's faces, and have different multiple use cases that people can try to do. So what facial recognition does, tries to detect, first of all, detect the face, try to capture an image, if that's how the program is put together, identify that face, like identify who it is, or, what type of person, is it a male or female? Is it, a child, different things like that. A lot of the facial recognition technologies go further. So they may be enabled with AI or databases that can either match and authenticate faces, and then the data is used in some fashion for something. So I had taken a flight recently in the US. I went to the airport, and they have a new facial recognition system where they had to scan your scan your ID card. So you have to put your ID card like in a reader, and then they captured your face, and they actually put a message up that said that, basically they're matching the face that they see right in front of them to the actual ID card. Because the card goes into a reader, and there's a lot more information on that magnetic strip of your ID. I'm not sure what exactly they're capturing. And a lot of times we don't even know what's on that strip. But they were saying, okay, once we capture and we match the face, then we immediately delete that image. I also saw a notice that said that if, people could opt out. So, and that notice is very small. So a lot of people pretty much just do it because they think they have to. You can opt out of those things. It's not convenient to do. And so I think that we're going to start to see a lot more facial recognition uses in that way. Okay. So why is facial recognition so popular? So facial recognition is a popular biometric because it does not require physical contact. So someone can read your face from afar. You don't know what they're reading or what they're doing. It's fast to detect a face with this technology, and it can be a unique identifier. So I think in the past, let's say when you went into a store and you saw a company had like video camera. In the old days, they were capturing video on either tape or some other magnetic technology, and someone actually had to physically go back and look at the tape. Nowadays, a lot of this stuff is either in the cloud or being captured on databases. But then also some of these tools have a functionality where they're trying to match two databases. So maybe crime databases, maybe the store or the place you're going, maybe they have known people that they want to detect and somehow decide what they want to do with that information. There was a case that's still going on actually in New York where an owner of, I think it's Radio City Music Hall, if I'm not mistaken, he was using facial recognition software, and I guess they had input the faces of lawyers that they were involved in a case, and they were actually denying access to those people based on facial recognition. So that's like a bad use of it, right? An abuse of those types of things. So I think that case is actually still going on. All right. So, so in terms of the process for facial recognition, there's always a probe photo selection. Those selections can be edited by the software, depending on, where your face is, how you're turning your face, depending on the light, all those things play into how the systems read the face and what they do with the information. There does not have to be a database, but a lot of companies want that, so they may connect it to a database. So maybe it's let's say a DMV database where they're trying to compare your face to an image of people's driver's licenses. Maybe there's like a criminal database. So maybe there's a database of people who have committed crimes where they're trying to match against that. They have AI search capabilities and then also human review. So like another use of facial recognition that people may not think about a lot, and that is like in a grocery store when you go through self-checkout. So self-checkout, I think the last statistic I saw that when you go through self-checkout, you may actually be captured on up to 70 different cameras. So it's not just one or two. And what they're looking for, not only are they looking for, to see if some people are stealing stuff, they're also trying to match your image against either maybe it's known data, like maybe a known person who have been in the store that may have stolen something in the past. But if there is, they think someone has done some type of theft, they try to use that as evidence in a future case, in a court case. Mm-hmm. So in terms of the way the facial recognition goes, there is, a question around the human manipulation of images. So these databases, although they capture this information, there may be functions or features within these tools that try to enrich or enhance a face. So let's say, for instance, it's captured a face of someone maybe them from the side. Maybe, they're in a dark area where you couldn't really make it out. There's been a lot of controversy about companies using these types of enhancements because they feel like, especially if they're being used in a court case, or something having to do with like criminal activity, they consider that will be like evidence tampering, right? So you're trying to create something that wasn't there, a human being involved, and then when you have something that you're admitting, for example, to evidence, that creates another layer of scrutiny and another layer of accuracy, right? So when you have data that's supposed to be used in a court case, supposed to be verifiable, not supposed to have people tampering with those things. It's called spoliation. And that may definitely be a problem. And so the quality of the image, the accuracy of those images, depending on how it's used, may be in question. If companies are using facial recognition or using these technologies for things that are maybe low risk areas, that may not be a problem, but it is a problem if somehow, let's say, someone is charged with crime, or they think that some crime has happened, they think, okay, this must be the person, right? The accuracy of those algorithms. So false positive, which is misidentification, and false negative, which is misidentification, right? So maybe a technology could have identified someone but didn't. Maybe they didn't have the data that they needed to match that face with something, or maybe they misidentified someone. So there was a case in, I think it was on the East Coast, where a black man was arrested because someone said his face matched they took an image from like a store video camera, and then they tried to match it against a driver's license picture, and they said it looked like him. So based on that, they actually arrested him. They took him in front of the judge. The judge said this is clearly not the same person. They eventually let him go, but that's harmful, right? So what if they, and there was another case in Chicago actually where someone was in jail for over a year, and they figured out that it wasn't him and that there was some tampering actually with the evidence, the spoliation that I was talking about. So this is a huge issue, a huge problem, especially on faces of people like me, who these technologies are not tested on properly, but then they're being widely used and also relied upon for their level of accuracy, which is not true. Bias and errors. So confirmation bias, cross-race bias. Is this person, we think this person is Puerto Rican, are they, maybe they're Italian, so a lot of times these databases, if they can't make the definitive determination, they try to guess, and the guessing is a problem, right? So maybe, some people say, well, people who are of this nationality, we want to check the database against those images and not others, right? So that becomes a issue of bias, and also an issue with like human review and human judgment. All right. So standards for facial recognition. So standards for facial recognition, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, NIST, has what they call a facial recognition vendor test. So it basically tries to compare facial recognition systems against one another to see how accurate those systems are. The problem with these tests is that a lot of times when people are putting in facial recognition systems, the testing typically is done on very clean images, like something that you get at driver's license agency. So very well lit, person looking straight at the camera, those types of things. But in real life and in a real world situation, you may not have a picture of someone straight on. It may not be the best light. Maybe they turn their head some type of way. So there really isn't a standard around those types of situations. So you can't really, so the type of accuracy that you get in a test lab with very clean images, very different than what you could get in a real life situation. And this is a problem. There's no national competence metric or training or certification for people who run these systems. So the knowledge about how to identify people, how to run these systems accurately, how to do the documentation, especially if this data is being used for in a legal setting, there has to be kind of like a chain of custody and some legal documentation that goes there, and that can't be done after the fact. No real testing of like true surveillance photos. That's a problem, right? Low light, partial face, edited photos, especially those photos being edited. That's a problem. This particular vendor test is voluntary, so not all systems go through this particular test, and the error rates can go from 0.13 to 50%. So that's a lot, right? So let's say it was 50% accurate. That means it's 50% inaccurate, and that may be a problem, especially when you're thinking about people, right? So does that mean that you arrest 50 out of 100 people? Because you have inaccurate information. That's a challenge. All right. So I want to talk about this case. It's called New Jersey versus Arteaga. This person, Francisco Arteaga, he was arrested he was a suspect in a store armed robbery. Eyewitnesses could not describe a person, what they looked like. So New York did a facial recognition search. They did not yield results. They sent that data to New York, asked them to do that same search, and they actually yielded results. So they had cropped still images from an indoor security camera and said that he was one of those people in the result thing. So the analyst reported that this person was a potential match. So Mr. Arteaga was identified in a photo lineup with two witnesses, and he requested detailed discovery of the facial recognition system. He wanted to see the original photos. He wanted to know what was edited, what searches were run, and who performed the search. So initially, the New York Superior Court denied that motion for him to actually do discovery. So this case actually was won in the appeal. So there was an amicus brief put on by EPIC and the Electronic Frontier Foundation, and also the National Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers. Basically, they said that this person, if they are being charged with something like a crime, the only corroborating evidence they have is facial recognition. The person should have be able to ask questions about how that data was collected, what training, what information, what that chain of evidence is. And this case was won. So I don't know why a lot of people hadn't been talking about this. I had actually got I got an email from someone, actually a reporter, Kashmir Hill at the New York Times, about this, because she was actually cited, her work was cited in this case, in this amicus brief. And I had told her about this case, and I'm like, this is like a huge deal. And I'm surprised why no one is like really talking about it. It's a huge deal because a lot of people think, unfortunately, it's not true. The facial recognition is infallible. It's completely accurate, and it should be used in court cases where I feel like it's not ready for prime time, not accurate enough to be used as evidence, and people should ask questions. All right, facial recognition in the news. San Francisco banned the use of facial recognition in 2019. Some of these bans came from as a result of the George Floyd incident about people facial recognition targeting or giving unfair, inaccurate results for people of color. Facebook actually they settled a Biometric Information Privacy Act case in 2020. I think the total that they were out was like, I think it was like $695 million. It was a lot, basically. Clearview AI, they got in trouble in 2019 in Illinois because it was a data scraping case. And I think as a result of that, they couldn't sell their technology to law enforcement for a certain amount of time. There were certain images that they had captured that they had to get rid of. There's quite more things that happened to Clearview AI as a result of that case. Actually, I think the city of Portland, Oregon, they have a ban on facial recognition for just regular, let's say, you're a shop owner, they don't want people to use those types of technologies. And Amazon, IBM, and Microsoft in 2022 halted the sales of their facial recognition systems to law enforcement. So laws, let's talk about laws. We think about GDPR, General Data Protection Regulation. New York has a cybersecurity regulation. California has CCPA. Illinois has BIPA. All these laws, although they may not specifically point out facial recognition, some uses of biometric data are deemed in that sensitive data category, right? So personal data, sensitive data, when you're dealing with biometrics, that falls typically under that sensitive data category. And so there is extra risk for companies that are playing in the space. And then there's also risk for people, especially depending on how these images are used. So I feel like if something is a tool can impact someone's life or liberty, it should be scrutinized. To me, the use of these types of technologies, in addition to being scrutinized, they should not be the only evidence, right? So there needs to be a lot more corroborating evidence of this being used for more. And so as a result of, especially in Illinois, the Biometric Information Privacy Act has been wildly successful. A lot of corporations hate it because they do get in trouble. I think a lot of people misunderstand BIPA because BIPA, unlike a lot of other privacy or data protection laws in the US, is more of a human law. So you don't have to be a customer of these companies to be able to file a claim or to get any type of redress from these companies, and you don't have to prove harm. So harm does not have to be, you don't have to suffer tangible harm under BIPA to be able to file a case and to get money. So an example of this is that Google lost a BIPA case a couple years ago. I can't remember. It was a big settlement. I can't remember the number right now, but I don't use Google Photos, but someone that I know uses Google Photos, and they had a photo of me in their Google Photos. And so Google owed me a check, okay, and I'm not their customer, and that person a check too, right? So this is why companies don't like BIPA. But as a result of the BIPA settlement for Facebook, they decided to stop using that face tagging technology. And I think that's, in the end of the day, what people want is not to be harmed, right, by technology. So to me, I thought that was a good outcome. All right. So the data privacy risk when you're dealing with biometric information is always data collection and retention. Like that's the game right there, right? So if you don't collect it and you don't retain it, like you're not having privacy issues. But a lot of companies, they want to collect it and they want to retain it, right? Data systems are made to remember and not to forget. So telling a company that they can't retain something, they're like really upset, right? It's like swimming upstream for them because the technology isn't made that way. So for companies that I advise that want to use these technologies, I'm like, collect as little as possible, retain as little as possible, right? So if you, let's say for instance, someone, during the height of the pandemic, a lot of people were taking people's temperatures, right? So you take someone's temperature, say Johnny comes in, he works at a certain job, you take his temperature today, take his temperature tomorrow, take his temperature the next day. Like, do you need a month's worth of Johnny's temperature? No, you don't, right? So you have the companies really need to think through that data purpose and be able to limit the data collection, because that's really a problem. The consent of the individual for facial recognition, you typically don't need consent in the US. It's typically around notice. And so if you're driving on the highway, you may see these signs that say, video surveillance is in use. And that's like all that's required, right? And that's it. So you walk to a store and they say, hey, we use video cameras, and that's it. What certain laws or regulations are trying to do around biometrics, not necessarily related to facial recognition, but if, let's say, Illinois, for example, has a law about video interviewing. So companies are using AI technology where they're capturing someone's face or likeness and they're trying to make judgments about like their worthiness to be hired. There is a consent mechanism. So the person has to opt into that and they have to be more transparent. So I think in places where people are using facial recognition technology, especially if it's related to, hiring, anything in those sensitive data categories, there may need to be some type of consent of the individual, right? Mistaken identity and false positives. This is, to me, it's like a misuse and abuse of the technology, because really the technology should be a helper to people. It shouldn't be the leader, right? So just like that case where the guy was arrested and they said he looked like this picture on this, his picture matched this photo on this DMV database or whatever. It's like, you still are required to use your human judgment. You can't defer your judgment to a tool, because the tools are infallible. They're not perfect, and that's really not their role, right? So they're not the human. So we can't abdicate our human responsibility to technology. There is cyber risk and breach risk. So more data, more problems. You're collecting more data, you're creating more risk, not only for the individual that you're collecting data from. If that data gets breached, then you have a risk now, right? And there's always all the talk is about AI now, and then accuracy. So how are you using this information? Maybe like I had gone to a showcase many years ago with Microsoft when they were like playing around with this technology, and basically you walk past the screen and it has your face in a square and it says, African American woman, age 35. I was happy because I thought I was 35 years old. Smiling, angry, upset, right? And so to me, the most emotional part of it is troubling, right? Because you can't really tell someone's emotion from their face. That's not an accurate way, right, to be able to tell. So I was concerned about, it's interesting in a novelty sense. It's more concerning when it's being used to make judgments and decisions about you, right? Maybe, if Elizabeth, maybe she looks angry. Maybe we shouldn't let her into this Taylor Swift concert, You don't want that. That's not the way that you should use the technology. So it's a misuse and abuse of the technology. And some of that may be nefarious and some of it may be just a lack of education. So, I tell people, don't use these tools if you don't want to do what it takes to educate yourself about what the right thing to do, what the wrong thing to do, and then know the limitations of these tools. All right. So takeaways, if you want to talk about the basics of facial recognition, how these systems work, the role of AI, everyone's super hot about AI now and they think it can do everything. but you can't. This Arteaga case is very interesting. Highly recommend people look that up. I have some notes at the end. So I have a couple of videos on this topic. I've talked about this topic for many years. And so I was also quoted in the New York Times recently an article about facial recognition of children. And actually, and this is like really interesting that as a result of that article, that company Premise decided to blur the faces of children in their facial recognition database. So that's a good win. Good win. So all right. And so here are the resources. I'll make sure you guys get copies of this. And then this is my contact information. All right. So I'm going to stop recording now. Okay. Thank you.